that was kind of quite refreshing to see that and think, right, okay, they're now safe, they're now in a safe country, and at this particular point, everything that they need is pretty much there, except the housing and what have you. But they were safe. They had basically what they needed to get themselves to the next kind of stopping point.
Thank you, Ken, for joining. I understand that you recently went on a humanitarian trip with a number of people in vans to the Ukrainian border. I'd love it if you could tell me more about that.
Relatively local charity to me via several WhatsApp groups, and eventually they needed drivers, fairly used to driving largish vehicles. We call them transit vans, so sort of something which is 3.5 ton and under. And a friend of mine who was also very interested decided to join me. So we were 5 vehicles in total.
Myself and some customers by day 3 of the conflict had started to gather goods, nappies, food, clothing, bedding, medicines that we wanted to get out just to help families. Before we knew it, we had a van load of supplies to get out there, and we were a little town trying to help another little town.
We delivered, I think it was over 7.5 tons worth of aid. A lot of it was kind of medical, essential items.
Take the box off me, please.
Yeah. To the border at a place called Medica. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that. It's a Polish name. So we delivered a whole host of aid and things, essential goods, which those either coming across the border from Ukraine into Poland needed immediately, and or stuff which would then be going into Ukraine at a later date, to the various cities being distributed to wherever they could get it in, to be perfectly honest, because obviously there is a need for lots of things, mostly kind of medical and food, those essential items which you will need in a war zone where you've got no electricity, you've got no clean running water, you've got very, very limited access to medical facilities. So essential medical supplies is a lot of what we did, but everything and the kitchen sink.
We've got 5 vans with everything in the kitchen sink. So we've got blankets, a lot of medical aid, a lot of field dressings as well. And in my car for Vladimir, I have got defibrillator, insulin, field dressings, a lot of painkillers, foil blankets, hazmat suits.
Okay, and I remember you were saying that some of the things there were like things like nappies, which I think in the US we call diapers, that people would need. So you said like things like, so you don't have clean water. Like, would that be like, I know like there's like some sort of iodine tablets or things that you could actually put.
Virtually all of the people coming across the border are women and children. So the need for immediate supplies for the women and the children, so things like nappies, diapers for you guys, basic medicines, toothpaste, soap, all those really, really basic things. I mean, these women were coming across the border with literally a suitcase. And that's all they had. Everything else had been left behind. No clothing, literally what they had in the suitcase. So they just were in desperate need of the most basic things to get them through that period of time between getting across the border, being, I'm going to say, sort of processed, not the right kind of word, but processed in terms of getting them to either camps or hotels or homes, however it has been dealt with in whichever country within Europe. People are sort of offering accommodation to these women and children. There were old people coming through in wheelchairs, the infirm. So it was all the really basic things, which just meant that as they got onto a bus to go to a centre, they had the most essential things that they needed to get them by over the next few days. And then everything else in terms of water purification, dried, I want to say dried foods, but sort of foods which you can eat straight out of the can, sort of stuff which is instant, which needs no preparation, can be eaten hot or cold. Those things which just make life in a difficult situation a little more bearable. That's what was shipped out, and a lot of field dressings, sort of, I'm going to call it military first aid, the kind of stuff for injuries, for battle wounds and all that kind of stuff. That was shipped out as well, not only by the group I was working with, but by lots of other groups who are either working as a coordinated group or just basically getting to the border to one camp and then using the resources to make sure that what people need there and then is available, and what is not needed there and then is transferred, put across into the border, taken across the border into the Ukraine on various emergency humanitarian aid convoys.
Okay, so that's how things, like, you brought it to the border. Some of it went to the people just coming over the border that were going to be processed and be helped and whatnot that had nothing, and then some of it was going to then make its way onto other convoys.
Yeah, I mean, at the border at Medica, there seemed to be, we passed one entrance into Poland at Medica, which was kind of in the village, and then we moved a few miles, a few kilometers further down to a smaller border crossing. I mean, literally hundreds of yards, hundreds of meters from the border. Around Medica and around other border crossings, there are large, they have created large warehouses where stuff is brought in. It's basically separated, it is sorted into the various components as to medical, food, clothing, etc., which will then be shipped out. So what we were doing was taking it to a smaller distribution centre where they seem to be incredibly proactive at getting the aid across the border within literally a day or two. So one of the things I did hear about was that some of the bigger organisations, their bureaucracy is a little more unwieldy, whereas the group I was working with, they were literally, that's it, it'll be out there tomorrow, we're loading, it's going on a large lorry tomorrow, a large truck tomorrow into the Ukraine. It's being delivered to cities relatively close. Like I say, one of the members of our group took his car and delivered quite a lot of medical aid directly to a hospital.
We know the goods that we're sending are helping. We sent a defibrillator on the convoy last Friday. It got to Volodymyr Hospital in the Ukraine on Saturday, and it has saved several lives every day since then.
It's very difficult. I mean, everything is needed, but sometimes some things are more needed than others, and that would be a lot of medical supplies, because obviously there are lots of casualties across the board in the Ukraine. So, but yeah, things like water, what you call sterilization or sterilization units, things which would just help the locals who are short of the most basic things.
And you made a point, I was one of our friends asked how can people help in other countries, and of course there's the World Health Organization and World Food Organization and stuff like that you can definitely donate to. Like I've donated YouTube. Google actually did something where you could donate and send it directly to 3 of these organizations that 100% of your money would go to help. But like you said, like some of this sounds more like grassroots, which might get without having to deal with these bureaucracies, the grassroots where one of the people just drove their car and brought the stuff directly to the hospital.
At Medica, we're dealing with local charities who are able to get the aid to the people as quickly and as soon as possible.
Well, working locally, the help is immediate. Anyone who comes across the border, they have come from home with obviously all their worldly possessions, but there are things they will already need immediately. Fresh toiletry supplies, hand sanitizers, Potentially nappies and feminine hygiene products are hugely important. And then the other stuff that's going directly into the Ukraine, there are areas of Ukraine that are obviously in significant need. Some of the aid that's currently coming in the system might take 4 months to be distributed. So what you're doing by bringing it here is ensuring that right across the Ukraine, all the way out to the far eastern sides, that we're able to get aid to where it's needed. And the aid will be where it needs to be in the Ukraine within the next couple of days.
So there's that immediate help, which is where the small organisations can get in fast. There's the bigger organisations, as you say, the Red Cross, World Health Organization, or whatever it's called, the WHO, and organisations like that who are collecting money, who will then be able to use that either for those who've come across the border. I mean, there are, I think the last figure I saw was like 3 million. That's a lot of people having to be absorbed into the neighbouring countries. And that's a fair old number of people to house, to feed, to deal with. That is going to be a real problem for those countries having to deal with the influx of refugees. However you're giving, whether you're physically giving something, which is obviously easier in Europe, a lot easier in Europe, or whether you're in the States or the Philippines or Australia or wherever it might be, the easiest, the simplest thing is to donate to one of the big charities who are getting involved in this conflict, who are giving support not only in the Ukraine but within Europe to those refugees who have flooded in. And that support is needed both sides of the border, both sides of the frontier. Obviously, there are a lot of people still in Ukraine who are in a dire situation, and we're seeing that on the news every day. We're seeing the massacres, we're seeing the cities completely destroyed, the whole infrastructure completely destroyed. These people are going to need the most basic things, the most, tins of food, water supplies, basic medicines, probably changes of clothing because there's no ability to wash clothing. So if you're going to be giving, if you're far away from Europe, if you're far away from the conflict, obviously the only thing you really can do is to find one of these big organizations who will be in there helping in some stage, and on one side of the border or the other.
Yeah, exactly. So I gave through the Google fundraiser that they've done, and then another thing that I did was a small thing, but there was a local organization that has something called a rope climbing obstacle thing. And so they had a night for Ukraine, and all the money is that from the cost of the tickets and everything that anything that you bought to eat or whatever, all that money went to Ukraine. So I took my family and we went and did some, and then they had the Ukrainian flags and they had Ukrainian music playing during the climb. The other small thing that I did, but again, like in the States or the Philippines or Australia, money, cash to some well-known organizations is probably the best thing that can be done. But I was amazed to hear of your journey, your humanitarian journey of saving humanity, and I'm thankful that you did such a wonderful thing. And
absolutely.
I wondered, did you feel
we
safe
were in the safe part of Europe.
Your journey?
We weren't on the war-torn side of Europe. Basically, I was just a driver. My job was to drive the 1,250, 1,300 miles from the UK, from basically London to the border with several other vehicles. So it's the kind of thing we all do. We all drive. So there was nothing dangerous about that. I was literally, and I'm going to say, just a glorified driver delivering aid in a very short period of time. We did the journey in about 37 hours. We had a stop over at a German fire station. The German fire brigade put us up, going out and coming back.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Well, we're in Germany still. You'll see behind me a fire truck. So we have been hosted, stayed overnight at a German fire station. So they've given us board and lodgings, given us a fantastic breakfast this morning, and the guys are up and about just preparing their fire appliance. So I'd like to say a big thank you to the German fire service for hosting us across our during our trip to Polish-Ukraine border. We stayed with them for a couple of nights, and most hospitable, and many of them speak very good English as well. So it's been an absolute pleasure.
Which was phenomenal. I mean, the guys were just brilliant. We'd been on the road since 3:30 UK time in the morning to get onto Eurotunnel.
So we're in France. Let the journey begin.
To then go on Eurotunnel into France. Obviously, we lost an hour, and then we just drove and drove and drove, just braking every 3 or 4 hours, either to fill up the vehicles, to change drivers, and we just drove. Thankfully, European roads are phenomenal, and it was easy just sitting at sort of 65, 70, 75 miles an hour, and on the German autobahns, faster than that, just cruising along. I mean, the only thing for us is being on the wrong side of the road. So, but sitting on a motorway, it makes no difference.
Well, remember, John, drive on the wrong side of the road.
I'm trying to. I'm going to drive in the middle, as I told you, it's the best way.
I think I heard you say that you're used to that, like, because like here in UK, you drive on the wrong side of the road, for me anyway. And so, like, going into Europe, you would be driving on the right side of the road.
Right side of the road.
And you were used
we drive
to
on
that.
the correct side of the road. That's the difference. But I mean, I mean, for me, within Europe, we're fairly used to this idea of chopping and changing sides, especially if you're from the UK, Ireland, and a couple of the other islands within Europe who also drive on the left. But I mean, sitting on a motorway, sitting on a freeway, as you guys would call it, on the autobahn, it's easy. There's no real problem. It's only on the minor roads you're having to double think junctions and double think roundabouts. Outside of that is all pretty much all motorway all the way there. And Europe as a whole is less populated than the UK, so their motorways were very, very clear of traffic on the whole. I mean, there was nothing. You could almost sit with cruise control on. You can't do that in the UK. Cruise control doesn't work because there's just too much traffic. There, you could just happily sit at sort of 70, 75 miles an hour, 110, 120 kilometers an hour. And you can maintain that speed without having to slow up or overtake other vehicles. So it really was just a very simple driving job.
So John's driving, and we're on the German-Polish border, just coming, I think, into the first of the Polish toll roads that we've got to do. There's a couple of our vehicles in front of us, and we've lost the other two, but we'll catch up with them soon. 7 more hours to the Ukrainian border.
To get the goods there, but to get them there as fast as possible. And that, I mean, so I did nothing but drive, like a lot of the other guys. We just drove the 8 day. It was just great knowing that when we got it there, some of it was going straight in to help, and what wasn't going straight in, we could see the people flooding across the border and being sort of processed and got onto buses to be taken elsewhere, knowing that these people coming across the border, if they wanted it, it was there. There were toilets there, because many of them had spent hours and hours and hours on the Ukrainian side being processed by not only the Ukrainians but by the Poles, as a way of preventing trafficking, human trafficking and stuff like that. So they seemed to be very on top of it and in terms of keeping those coming across the border as safe as possible. So we just knew that when they came across the border, when they came down, I'm going to call it a little street, they kind of came off the border, down this little street, and down this little street were toilets. There was food, there were people handing out freshly cooked pizza, there were food centres. It was all free, just come along, pick up what you needed. Toiletries, clothing, children's toys. Somebody donated hundreds of these little teddy bear things, these little toy, how we call little toys for children, and just everything else. They could just literally pick up what they needed, get onto the bus, and then be processed further down the line in terms of getting them some kind of housing, getting them housed somewhere else. So it was all very well organised in that respect. I mean, and it was all. They were all international, so there were people from the UK, the US, Canada, Latin America, Spain, France, the people from all over the world in this area helping to make the people welcome as they came across the border. I mean, very difficult situation from those people. I mean, literally getting across the border, I suppose, in one respect, they're getting across into safety. They're not in a war zone anymore. Well, not at the moment. So that was
Right.
That was kind of that was quite refreshing to see that and think, right, okay, they're now safe, they're now in a safe country, and at this particular point, everything that they need is pretty much there, except the housing and what have you. But you know, they were safe. They had basically what they needed to get the rest of to get themselves to the next kind of stopping point.
And did you have any chance to speak to
Okay,
any
right.
of the Ukrainian
So
people coming across the border?
the situation was when we drove there, it was literally a 2-hour stop off, unload and get back. So I got detached from the rest of the crew. I'd gone off and my cameraman mode, my news cameraman mode kicked in. The vans had arrived. There was a bit of moving stuff around. And I thought, I've got 5 minutes, I'll just pop across and just get some shots. I came back after 5 minutes and all the vans had gone. So I'm on my own. My mobile phone's gone, my clothing's gone. Fortunately, I had a wallet and I had my passport. That was fine. Wallet and passport with credit cards, fine, I'll get by. But I'd gone off with a little GoPro just to shoot stuff. So there were people who were coming across, very few spoke English. So obviously there's a language issue.
Right.
I was speaking mostly to those people within the humanitarian side of things, so those people who were helping, rather than the women and the children coming across, because very few spoke English. You know, they had their own interpreters, and a lot of people were using Google Translate to communicate with these people.
Okay.
I don't know how close Polish and Ukrainian are as languages. I'm not, because obviously they share a border, so there must be some commonality somewhere. I'm not too sure, but a lot of people seem to be using Google Translate. Thank you, Google. Brilliant service, Google Translate. They'd taken some stuff out of the vans. They'd then gone to a warehouse to offload everything. So they came back after a couple of hours. I mean, I wasn't worried because it was a case of, like I say, I had my passport, I had my wallet, I had my credit cards. Push comes to shove, I can get out of here, you know. But yes, they knew they'd lost me, but they'd also knew that I had gone in there because it was one of the first, okay, kind of backtracking a while. One of the guys who had gone into the Ukraine and had actually gone in physically into the Ukraine this time to deliver the medical aid to a hospital. I know him, and I said last time I would love to have come across to just film the journey and to film where this stuff goes and what's happening to it. And so the guys knew what I did for a living and knew that potentially I wanted to get in there to at least get something so that the charity on this side of the pond, you know, in the UK, could show to the people who were giving the aid how and where the aid was going. So whilst, I mean, obviously I contacted with the guys at the reception centre and said, look, I'm here, I'm just across the road, it's only a few hundred yards, it wasn't very big, come and find me, I'll keep coming back every half an hour. So yeah, I just spent some time shooting what I could shoot. I foolishly only taken one battery with me, so I had to be sort of thoughtful about how and what I was shooting, working out what I wanted to show in terms of, you know, but I didn't want to get in people's faces either. I mean, you know, there were members of the press there, and I've done this before, and it's a bit, when you're getting into people's faces with cameras, it's especially in such a distressing situation as that. It was the one thing I really hated about doing news, was that push your camera in somebody's face who's you know, in a really stressed situation because they're fleeing from a war zone. So I just did kind of very general things to give a sense of what this was about and what this little street was about and what it offered those refugees fleeing the Ukrainian conflict were receiving immediately as a result of the donations of those people from the UK, but also from across Europe. I mean, you know, all these organizations were all helping in one way or another. So it was good to kind of get in there and see how it was all working and how, I'm going to say it was organized chaos, because I think that's the best way to describe that, because you can't organize this to the nth degree. You just create something which works and works because it works, not because it's been thought out well, but just because it works. So, these people were just brilliant, just really, really good at dealing with the refugees and just making sure they came through and had what they wanted. And yeah, it was, the thing for me, which just really made it, was the guy going around with fresh pizzas. He just had this, just pulling them out and going around. All the kids were kind of picking up pieces of pizzas.
Спасибо.
Pizza? Pizza?
Вроді чорна, але можна. Бери піцу. Ти будеш прямо тут, може там? Бери. Дякую. Ні, дякую.
Which, for the children, for the adults, it's difficult, but for the children, trying to understand what's going on, I suspect, was incredibly difficult. There is talk later on in the month, so later on this month in April, of another convoy going out. I think what they have been trying to do is, because a lot of stuff's coming in and not all of it is needed immediately, and not all of it is needed. I think they're trying to be much more specific about the goods going out. That way they're not filling vans with stuff which is not needed either at the border, or is more problematic, or is less worthwhile taking across the border. You know what I mean? It's the stuff they absolutely need across the border, and this stuff which, well, hey, in a perfect world, fantastic, but I don't need that. What I need are the basics to live. I think they're being more specific. So the next convoy they've muted will be something like the 23rd, 24th, 25th, somewhere around that of April. So I put my name down and said, if I'm around, absolutely, I'll do it. More than happy to get into the seat of a car again and the seat of a van. I
actually talked to local people, and people wanted to know how could they help. And I'll have a link for Google's doing a fund drive that's going to three, like the World Health Organization and the World Food Organization and one other, where 100% of your money would go to those. And then maybe if you have the link to this local organization, we can put that in as well into the description. I would love to do what's called a fundraiser for YouTube, but I'm not monetized yet, so I'm not able to do that little donate button. But I can at least direct people to the description where they would be able to.
Well, absolutely. I think the main thing is just making people aware that their money, the goods, are being used, and they're being used effectively to help those fleeing the conflict and those who cannot flee the conflict because they're just stuck in the Ukraine. You can't ship 40 million people across the border, more so when you've got Russian troops all over the place and wreaking havoc upon the cities. A lot of stuff will have to go in, and that's incredibly difficult to organise and incredibly dangerous for those who are going in. It's a war zone, and there are all kinds. We've already seen several members of the press being killed. Obviously, thousands of civilians who have been injured and killed. Troops on both sides are being killed. So, for those big organisations, it will take some work to be able to get the humanitarian into some of these cities. Is they're either one, liberated, and the roads which lead to these cities are secured, and then aid they'll be needing to push in hundreds of tons worth of aid to help these people out, because many have lost their homes, they've lost absolutely everything, they're short of the most basic things. And people like the World Health Organization, the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, whichever organization it would be, they're fairly used to being able to selectively get the aid which is most important into these disaster/war zone areas. So those organizations can do with the money, and it will help those people in the Ukraine and those who have come across into Europe and need support now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking your time, and I'm hoping that more people will. Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that this thing ends. Actually, I hope that. Yeah,
me too. Absolutely, yes. Things have got to improve, but let's see. It's not a situation we should be in, but we've got to help wherever we can.
We are grateful to the United Kingdom, especially to John, who volunteered to help. We also looking forward to your valuable help in future, because all hospitals are in difficult situation now.
and I feel as if I made a difference, so much so we're taking the van back, reloading it, and I'm being back on this train in probably 6 hours time. So I've got a mate of mine, he's coming down, and we're taking another load straight out because the need is just there. They need stuff, and they need stuff now.